So, where's Betty? Well, she's at Melbourne Airport, all set to board a plane to Italy. But not before a spot of duty-free shopping and to sample some bum cream. She looks excited. And after getting a little tipsy, she's arrived at the Terminator 2 International Departure Gates. Obviously some kind of very cool movie-themed terminal. She'll be back. And as you can see, Betty's managed to secure herself a first-class seat all of her own. Nothing but the best for this slot car royalty. See you, Betty. Say good day to the gang at NSR for us. First port of call after arriving in Sicily, Betty couldn't wait to try one of these world-famous custard-filled croissants. Oh yeah, looks amazing. You're not gonna eat all that by yourself, are you, Betty? You are? Good grief, she did too, and a whole plate full of dinner. You better walk it off, Betty. Good grief, Betty, where's your manners, girl? Oh, dear me. And here she is, walking it off in one of the many numerous back streets of Sicily. Thriving metropolis, lots of people. You just can't go anywhere without the goddamn tourists everywhere. Literally have to fight your way through the crowds to get to the main drag and see those sights and take it all in, yes. And having pushed and shoved away through all those rude people, Betty finally emerges in one of the main squares where there's a lovely Christmas lights display waiting for her to behold. Very, very nice. And so after a great big long flight from Australia, and after a great big feed and a wander around the back streets of Sicily at a god-awful hour, it's time for a sleep. Next day, bright and early, Betty headed off to check out the famous Pompeii ruins. And of course this involved lots of walking, and more walking, and then some stopping to catch a breath. Oh gosh, of course no historic ruins are complete without the obligatory gift shop. Yes. Now just look at these ruins, and isn't it interesting how all these columns have been sheared off and weathered at roughly the same height? Betty is marvelling at all the history just oozing out of every nook and cranny here. Yes, this once thriving and sophisticated Roman city, located near the coast of the Bay of Naples, it was suddenly buried under metres of ash and pumice thanks to a cataclysmic eruption courtesy of Mount Vesuvius, seen there in the distance. Very eerie if you ask me. An entire city full of people, virtually wiped out in an instant. Betty is most certainly getting herself one heck of a history lesson, up close and personal. Imagine these streets just thriving with people, all sorts of marketplace stalls, all kinds of people from all walks of life going about their daily business. When all of a sudden the earth in the distance there literally opens up and suddenly unleashes a cataclysmic torrent of fire and calamity. Before anybody really knows what's going on, it's raining down upon them from the heavens above. There's nowhere to turn, nowhere to run, everything is on fire, and now they're getting buried alive. The city silenced for an eternity until centuries later when the excavation revealed the secrets and horrors that would have occurred in seconds. It's extraordinary that any of this managed to survive at all, and you can't help but wonder what exactly was here. For example, these look like they were some kind of public toilets, and that looks a lot like a pizza oven. Was this perhaps a popular Friday night venue called Pizzas and Poop Shoots? And was this perhaps the venue where the legendary Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones fame played his very first gig? He is ancient after all, and some industry insiders say he's immortal. Wonder what songs he played that night. I think they're wondering the same thing. Yeah. Could it have been Play With Fire? Or was it Paint It Black? I guess old Keith is the only one who can answer that question. And doesn't his friends in Pink Floyd like to play the odd concert or two here in Pompeii? Yeah, and I think David Gilmour played a concert here recently. Must have been a thriving nightlife and a thriving music scene until the volcano wiped it all out of existence. Much like the way archaic government policy and skyrocketing insurance premiums is doing to it these days. Yeah, now this looks like it could have been a tavern, and next door, a strip club. And there's our dreaded culprit in the distance, just thinking about doing it one more time. You just know it is, don't you? Actually, I wonder what it looks like up there. Here you see, Betty was able to hitch a ride with some friendly locals. Betty's becoming somewhat of an expert of late when it comes to orifices, what with the poop chute and that naughty crocodile too. And as long as she doesn't get taken away and murdered and buried somewhere secluded, I think we might catch ourselves a glimpse of the once fiery orifice itself. Yeah, matter of fact, Betty seems to be absolutely bristling with anticipation. After all, she is about to see one of the most dangerous orifices in the history of the world. Look out, Betty. Be careful. Although, by the look of all that snow, I think you're going to be okay. Looks like they've reached the summit, or at least they've gone as far as they can by car. The rest is all on foot. Is that it? We came all the way up here to see that. That did all the damage. It's like a dried up old bunghole. Bit of bum fluff, crusty bits on the side, bit of snow, lots of dust, lots of particles, a big old dried up bunghole. I kind of feel a bit underwhelmed. What do you think, Betty? Yeah, she's not very impressed. Yeah, she's waiting to see. Does anything happen? Does anything happen? No, Betty, I don't think anything happens. Unless we just hang around a few hundred years. Yeah. Well, guess you better make the most of it, eh, Betty? Hey, that's not gold deposits over in the hillside there. Could you bring some of that back with you, maybe? Startlingly, it looks just like the gold deposits I created inside the mine shaft tunnel. Who'd have thought? Now we're getting a bit more scenic. Little bit more scenic. Actually, it's kind of disconcerting thinking that at any given moment the ground beneath you could just suddenly erupt and you'd be hurtled thousands of feet skyward. Yeah, it's a bit scary. Maybe it's time to wrap up this leg of the trip and move on elsewhere. Maybe find a spot of shopping, perhaps. But before we do that, let's just have one more little gaze around this rather scenic, if not a little intimidating, part of the landscape here. It is very imposing, especially knowing the history, and quite a task to build that chairlift all the way up to the top. But before we depart, Betty took the opportunity to have some fun in the snow. We don't get a lot of snow down in Australia, so she built a snowman. You can even hear her singing the song, I can build a snow. Yeah, you know the one, yeah. And trust Betty to find the one and only carrot to be found anywhere in the vicinity for a nose attached to his head. Yeah. And having successfully murdered and buried Betty under that snow, the locals are seen here fleeing the scene at a great speed. I'm only kidding. They got the body in the poo. No, she's fine. She's here and she's found some shopping. Looks rather animated and somewhat excited. So there's Dolce & Gabbana, one of my favourite colognes actually. And over here across the square, what have we got? Why, it's the House of Gucci, of course. Very nice. And what else is lurking in this vicinity, I hear you ask? Why, it's Polo Ralph Lauren, of course. Another one of my favourite colognes. And right next door, it's none other than Armani. All the big names here in one nice, convenient location. Poor old Betty doesn't know which one to go in first. She can't decide. Hurry up and make up your mind, Betty. We don't give a toss about any of these. We want to go and see the NSR factory. Hurry up! For God's sake, bloody buy something! Fleeing the scene yet again at a great speed, Betty and her friends are now on their way to see the seaside. Yes, the seaside. Not the NSR factory, but the bloody seaside. Well, I suppose it's rather a nice seaside. Very scenic. Lovely, clean, sandy shoreline. Beautiful blue waters. Why didn't I come along on this trip? Slot car adventurers, feast your eyes on Pompeii in southeastern Sicily. And you know what? Life really is a biash since I wasn't allowed to go along and see this for myself. And after a rather epic day of sightseeing, the gang are fleeing the scene once again at a great speed, as one can in this part of the world. Yes, if you're an individual who can't drive 55, this place is for you. Check it out sometime. And so, after returning back to base, Betty and co ventured out for some more yum-yums. Seen here, made fresh for you, right before your eyes. So, what could it be, I hear you ask? What are these friendly folk putting together for Betty? Why, more of those custard-filled croissants, of course. And she's having 2 this time. Good grief, Betty! Oh yes, and of course she got the liqueur custard halfway through the second one and she's already paralytic, always getting herself into predicaments. Time to hit the back streets and walk it off, and this time she's going to be doing several laps of the area, that's for sure. Actually, this place is looking a little bit spooky. All the crowds have disappeared, and now Betty walks the back streets of Sicily all alone in the middle of the night. Anything could happen, anything at any moment. A door could fly open and a crazed maniac could come running out into the street. Of course, that's not going to happen, is it? Because I wasn't allowed to go along, was I? No, I'm stuck here in my little home studio doing the stupid voiceover, not getting to see a bloody thing. And where the hell is the NSR factory? That's the only reason why any of us are watching this thing. Oh, hang on a second. What's down there? Is that the NSR factory? No. Actually, Betty, I think it might be time to get out of here. Oh, Betty, you're dropping down quicker than a Bangkok hooker with jelly legs. But I digress. Here she is on her final leg, back to home base to get a nice big sleep before the big event tomorrow morning, a visit to the NSR factory. Please, can we see the NSR factory? Please. Well, sure enough, the very next day, Betty got to visit NSR. But there were a few little conditions and caveats. The main one of them being nobody gets to film the goings-on the factory floor, which of course is perfectly understandable. She did, however, get to meet and spend some time with Andrea, the CEO, who proudly showed off the entire history of the NSR Professional Slot Car brand. Seen here in this room is a veritable NSR museum. All of their greatest creations over the years here on display in all their glory, from the legendary Moslers upon which the company's reputation is built, to all the very latest models, special editions and limited edition box sets. This is a company that most certainly has not rested on its laurels, consistently delivering some of the very finest slot cars that you could get your hands on. The Porsches, the Formula Ones, McLarens, even more Moslers. It was all here on display, and needless to say, Betty was most impressed. Only the day before, she found herself standing atop one of the most destructive volcanoes in the history of the world. But today, that almost pales into insignificance next to the stunning display here at the NSR showroom. Thousands of slot cars on display, every make, every model, every livery produced by the team at NSR, and by the end of the morning, Betty's head was spinning, and no, that wasn't the liqueur from the night before. Now, while there wasn't any filming allowed on the factory floor, Betty did manage to catch a glimpse of NSR's in-house test track. What an amazing layout. An epic 8-lane mega track. This is where each and every new NSR slot car is put through its paces. And while Betty didn't catch any car-on-track action, you can imagine the awesome racing action that has happened inside this room. As a matter of fact, so overwhelmed, Betty fell asleep. Later that evening, Andrea, the CEO of NSR, appeared with us all on the Aussie Slot Car Show Live, the final episode for the year. And the very next day, it was time for Betty to head on home. What a trip!